The neon lights of Chicago bleed through the rain-streaked glass, but inside the penthouse, the silence is deafening. Roman Castillo, a man whose name commands the underworld, doesn't feel pity. He doesn't feel much of anything. Until 2:00 a.m. on a cold Tuesday. That was the night he found Sienna slumped against the freezing marble of his master bathroom, desperately trying to conceal the violent purple and black bruises staining her ribs. In that fractured second, the ice in his veins didn't just melt, it shattered. And the city had no idea a brutal war was about to begin over a girl who was supposed to be nothing but a debt. To the outside world, Roman Castillo was a phantom in a tailored Tom Ford suit. He was the legitimate CEO of Castillo Logistics, a multi-million-dollar shipping empire based out of Chicago. But to the feds, the local police, and the terrified whispers of the underground, Roman was the undisputed head of the largest organized crime syndicate in the Midwest. He was a man composed entirely of sharp edges, calculating logic, and a legendary lack of empathy. Love, attachment, and mercy were liabilities. Roman did not do liabilities. Then came Sienna Hayes. Sienna was 24, a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and completely, tragically civilian. Her only crime was sharing blood with a reckless stepbrother named Ricky Gallagher. Ricky was a degenerate gambler who thought he could outsmart the house at the Golden Crest, an underground high-stakes casino run by Roman's ruthless right-hand man, Silas Vanderberg. Ricky had managed to rack up a staggering $600,000 debt. When the time came to pay, Ricky vanished, leaving behind a fake passport, an empty bank account, and his sister's home address on the emergency contact line. Roman didn't usually handle collections himself. He was insulated, but Silas brought Sienna to the warehouse on the south side because she hadn't cried when the enforcers kicked her door down. She hadn't begged. She had simply looked at the guns, grabbed her coat, and said, "I know what my brother did. Let's go." When she stood before Roman in that dimly lit room, smelling of sterile hospital soap and cheap vanilla perfume, she made an insane proposition. She would work off the debt. Every paycheck, every asset, handed over to the Castillo family. Roman had laughed a harsh, empty sound. A nurse's salary would take 4 lifetimes to clear the principal, let alone the interest. "You don't have the money, Sienna." "And I don't have the patience," Roman had told her, his dark eyes assessing her small, rigid frame. "But you are going to be my insurance. You're going to live in my home. You won't run, you won't hide. And when Ricky realizes I have his little sister, he'll crawl out of whatever hole he's hiding in. Until then, you belong to the house." For 3 months, Sienna had lived in the sprawling 88th floor penthouse overlooking Lakeshore Drive. To the staff, she was a ghost. To Roman, she was a piece of furniture, a living, breathing ledger entry. They coexisted in a freezing state of apathy. Roman worked long, dangerous hours orchestrating the smuggling of untraceable firearms and laundering millions through real estate. Sienna went to her shifts at the hospital under the watchful eye of a bodyguard named Bruno, returning to the penthouse to sleep in the East Wing, entirely isolated. Roman prided himself on his total indifference toward her. He noticed she was quiet. He noticed she barely ate the gourmet meals his private chef prepared. He noticed the heavy, dark circles under her hazel eyes. But he convinced himself it was just the stress of captivity. He didn't know about Caleb Weston. Caleb was Sienna's ex-fiancé, a charming, manipulative sociopath who had made her life a living hell for 3 years before she finally escaped him. Caleb wasn't just a bitter ex. He was a mid-level supplier for the rival Russo family. More importantly, Caleb had recently cut a deal. He was an active, highly valued confidential informant for the DEA. He was untouchable. The police wouldn't arrest him, the feds protected him, and the underworld tolerated him because of his connections. Caleb hadn't taken Sienna's disappearance well. He had spent the last 3 months hunting her. He knew she was with Roman Castillo, a man he despised. And Caleb, twisted and emboldened by his federal protection, had found a way to slip past the impenetrable defenses of Roman's world. For the past 3 weeks, Caleb had been getting to Sienna. A intercepted text message here, a burner phone left in her hospital locker there, and then the physical ambushes. In the deserted hospital parking garage, in the blind spots of the security cameras, he would corner her, his hands heavy and cruel, whispering that if she told Castillo, he would hand over a dossier to the DEA that would put Roman in a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life. Caleb had convinced Sienna that her silence was the only thing keeping her, and ironically, her captor safe. Sienna absorbed the abuse. She was terrified of Caleb, but she was equally terrified of Roman. She believed that if Roman found out someone was touching his property, a bloodbath would follow, and Caleb's DEA handlers would rain fire down on all of them. So, she kept her mouth shut, wore loose scrubs, and hid the mounting physical trauma beneath heavy sweaters. She thought she was hiding it well, but secrets in the Mafia world have a way of bleeding through the cracks. It was a Tuesday. The kind of bitter, freezing November night in Chicago, where the wind off Lake Michigan felt like razor blades. Roman had spent the evening at a tense sit-down at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse with the Irish syndicate from the South Side. The negotiations had been volatile, ending in veiled threats and a broken glass. Roman returned to the penthouse at 1:45 a.m., his jaw tight, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, smelling of expensive bourbon and stale cigar smoke. The penthouse was entirely dark, save for the low amber glow of the security panels. The silence was usually a comfort to Roman, a sign that his fortress was secure. He loosened his silk tie, poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan, and walked toward the master suite in the west wing. As he passed the long, glass-walled corridor that bridged the 2 wings of the apartment, he stopped. Roman's instincts, honed by years of surviving assassination attempts and betrayals, were terrifyingly sharp. The penthouse was soundproofed, practically a tomb, but he heard something. A sharp, ragged intake of breath, the muffled sound of skin hitting porcelain. His hand instinctively dropped to the cold steel of the Sig Sauer P-226 holstered at his waist. He moved silently, his leather shoes making zero noise on the hardwood floors, tracing the sound toward the east wing, toward Sienna's quarters. The door to her ensuite bathroom was cracked open by an inch. A harsh, fluorescent sliver of light cut across the dark hallway. Roman pushed the door open, his gun drawn and leveled. The breath violently left his lungs. He didn't find an intruder, he found Sienna. She was sitting on the edge of the large marble bathtub, her back to him, entirely unaware of his presence. She was stripped down to a simple white camisole and underwear. In her trembling hand, she held a washcloth soaked in hot water, pressing it to her side. Roman's eyes locked onto her reflection in the massive vanity mirror. Her skin, usually pale and flawless, was a canvas of horrific violence. There was a massive, sickeningly dark cluster of purple, yellow, and black bruising blooming across her left ribcage. It looked as though she had been repeatedly kicked with steel-toed boots. Higher up, on her collarbone, were dark, distinct finger marks, bruises, forming the undeniable shape of a man's brutal grip. A fresh, shallow cut rested just above her right eyebrow, bleeding sluggishly. Sienna bit down on a rolled-up towel to muffle a sob as she pressed the warm cloth against her ribs. Her entire body was shaking. Something deep, foundational, and entirely unmapped inside Roman Castillo fractured. The man who had ordered the execution of rivals without blinking, the man who calculated the value of a human life in dollar amounts, suddenly felt a blinding, roaring surge of white-hot adrenaline. It wasn't just anger, it was an instinctual, primal fury so intense it made his vision blur. The cold, detached Mafia boss vanished in a millisecond. Who did this? His voice wasn't loud. It was a terrifyingly calm, deadened rasp that seemed to lower the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. Sienna jumped so violently she dropped the washcloth. She spun around, her eyes wide with absolute terror, crossing her arms over her chest in a desperate, futile attempt to hide the injuries. She backed up against the tiled wall, trembling uncontrollably. "Our Roman," she stammered, her voice raspy. I fell. At the hospital, the supply closet was wet, and Stop lying to me." Roman stepped into the bathroom. The gun was back in its holster, but his physical presence was overwhelming. He was 6'3" of solid, lethal muscle, and the look in his dark eyes was catastrophic. He closed the distance between them. Sienna flinched, turning her head away, expecting him to be angry that his insurance was damaged. But Roman didn't yell. He stopped inches from her, slowly raising his large, scarred hands. He didn't touch her, keeping them hovering in the air. "Sienna," he said, the dangerous edge in his voice replaced by a demanding, heavy severity. "Look at me." She slowly dragged her gaze up to his. Her hazel eyes were flooded with tears. "Those are finger marks on your throat," Roman said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Your ribs are bruised from a blunt force impact. That is not a fall. Someone put their hands on you. Someone beat you." Sienna swallowed hard, shaking her head. "Please, Roman, just leave it alone. It's nothing. It is my house. It is my protection." Roman's jaw ticked, the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "Who touched you?" "You don't understand," she cried softly, tears finally spilling over. "If I tell you, he'll ruin you. He has files, Roman. He told me he'd send them to the feds. He said if I breathed a word, he would have Castillo Logistics raided by morning. I was trying to protect— Protect me?" Roman interrupted, the absolute absurdity of the statement momentarily stunning him. A civilian nurse, letting herself be beaten to protect a mob boss. The shattered piece inside his chest began to ache. He gently, ever so gently, placed his warm hands on her bare shoulders, his thumbs resting just above the violent bruises on her collarbone. The contrast of his lethal hands being so remarkably gentle sent a shudder through Sienna. "Listen to me very carefully," Roman murmured, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "There is not a man on this earth, there is no government agency, there is no God that can save the man who did this to you. I don't care about the files. I don't care about the feds. I care about who put these marks on your skin." Sienna looked into the abyss of his dark eyes. For 3 months, she had seen only ice. Now, she saw a raging, unquenchable inferno, and for the first time since she had been taken collateral, she felt entirely, undeniably safe. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Caleb Weston." Roman froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. He knew Caleb Weston. Everyone in the life knew the untouchable rat. Roman slowly pulled his hands back. His face morphed into a mask of pure, terrifying predation. "Weston," he repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He turned his back to her, pulling his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number he reserved only for absolute emergencies. It rang once before his underboss picked up. "Silas," Roman said, his voice carrying the calm of a coming hurricane. "Wake up the crew. Lock down the city. We're going hunting." By 3:00 a.m., the penthouse was transformed from a silent tomb into a war room. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark, churning waters of Lake Michigan reflected the grim faces of Roman's inner circle. Silas Vanderberg stood by the marble kitchen island, a tablet in hand. Silas was an older, calculating man, with a thick scar running through his left eyebrow. Next to him was Arthur Artie Russo, no relation to the rival family, just a brutal enforcer who handled Roman's wet work. In the center of it all was Roman. He had taken off his suit jacket and tie, the sleeves of his black dress shirt rolled up to his forearms, revealing the dark ink of his syndicate tattoos. He was pacing. The energy radiating off him was so volatile that even Silas, who had known Roman for 15 years, was keeping a cautious distance. In the other room, Sienna was finally asleep. Roman had called in a private underworld doctor, Dr. Eris Thorne. Wait, Eris Gallagher, no, doctor. Victor Eris, who had arrived with a black bag, given her painkillers, and taped her ribs. She was sedated, wrapped in Roman's own heavy down comforter in the master suite. Roman had refused to let her sleep alone in the East Wing. "Caleb Weston," Silas said, rubbing his temple. "Roman, you know who this kid is. He's DEA. He's Agent Thomas Croft's golden goose. Croft has been trying to build a RICO case against us for 3 years. If we touch Weston, Croft will drop the hammer. It won't just be an arrest. It'll be federal indictments for half the organization." "I don't care if he's the president's bastard son," Roman said, stopping his pacing to plant his hands on the island, leaning over it. "He put his hands on a girl under my roof. He threatened my operation. He dies. Today." Artie shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, it ain't just the feds. Weston is moving product for the Russo family. If we clip an informant who's also earning for Victor Russo, we spark a war with the South Side, on top of bringing down the DEA. Then we fight a war." Roman snapped, his eyes flashing violently. "Are we men or are we accountants, Artie? The Russos can burn, Croft can burn, Weston dies." Silas sighed, knowing there was no talking Roman down when he got like this. The cold, calculating boss was gone. This was a man operating purely on a lethal, possessive instinct. All right, Silas conceded. But we have to do it smart. If we just gun him down in the street, we handcraft the victory. We need to isolate Weston. We need to make it look like the Russos did it. Or we need to find out what Weston has on us and destroy it first. Roman straightened up, his mind finally engaging its tactical gears, fighting through the red haze of his rage. Sienna said Weston cornered her in the hospital parking garage. That's a secure facility. Bruno drives her to and from work. Bruno waits in the lobby. How the hell did Weston know exactly when she'd be isolated? How did he know the blind spots of the cameras? Silence fell over the kitchen. The implication was heavy, toxic. You're saying he had help, Artie muttered. Weston is a punk. A mid-level grifter who got lucky with a federal badge, Roman said, his voice turning dangerously quiet. He doesn't have the tactical intelligence to bypass my security detail and hospital cameras for 3 weeks without slipping up. Someone is feeding him her schedule. Someone on my payroll is working with an informant. Silas's face hardened. Bruno? Bruno is stupid, but he's fiercely loyal, Roman noted. No, it's someone higher, someone who knows the security rotations, someone who knows exactly what time the shift changes happen. Roman walked over to the windows, staring down at the sweeping headlights on Lakeshore Drive. The city looked peaceful from up here, but underneath, the rot was spreading. Pull the phone records for every captain and lieutenant in the organization for the last month. Roman ordered without turning around. Check offshore accounts. I want to know who suddenly paid off a mortgage or bought a new car. Weston doesn't have money, but his DEA handler, Croft, has a discretionary fund. Find the leak. And what about Weston? Artie asked. Roman's reflection in the glass was pale and terrifying. Find out where he sleeps. Don't touch him yet. Put eyes on him. I want to know what he eats, who he talks to, and what time he takes his morning piss. When we move, it won't be a quick bullet in the back of the head. I'm going to take him apart piece by piece. As Silas and Artie left the penthouse to execute his orders, Roman walked slowly back to the master suite. He pushed the heavy oak door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the city outside. Sienna was a small lump in the center of his massive king-sized bed. Roman walked over and sat carefully on the edge of the mattress. He listened to the shallow, slightly strained rhythm of her breathing. He reached out, his knuckles lightly brushing against a lock of her dark hair that had fallen across her face. He had spent his entire life building walls, ensuring no one could ever get close enough to hurt him or force his hand. Yet here he was, about to ignite a multi-front war with the federal government and a rival crime family over a civilian nurse he had claimed as collateral. He didn't care. As he looked down at her bruised face, Roman Castillo realized with a chilling certainty that there was no line he wouldn't cross, no law he wouldn't break, and no amount of blood he wouldn't shed to keep her safe. The debt was forgotten. She wasn't collateral anymore. She was his. The morning sun over Lake Michigan was a blinding, unforgiving white, piercing the floor-to-ceiling windows of Roman's office. It was 8:00 a.m. Roman hadn't slept. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a cold cup of black coffee, untouched beside a stack of encrypted financial printouts. Silas walked in, closing the heavy oak doors behind him. He looked grim. In his hand, he held a manila folder, the kind of analog, untraceable file they used when digital footprints were too risky. I pulled the thread, Silas said, his voice gravelly from exhaustion. He dropped the folder onto the desk. You were right, Roman. It wasn't Bruno. Bruno's phone pings exactly where it's supposed to be, and his bank accounts at Chase are embarrassingly empty. It's someone with clearance, someone who knew the exact layout of the hospital's blind spots and your personal security rotation. Roman opened the folder. Inside were wire transfer logs from Northern Trust, cross-referenced with a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Gideon Shaw, Silas said softly. Roman's hands stopped moving. Gideon wasn't just a captain. He was the man who had taught Roman how to launder his first million. He ran the South Loop territory, managing the high-end extortion rackets and keeping the local politicians fed and happy. He was practically family. Explain, Roman commanded, his voice devoid of any inflection. Gideon's been bleeding, Silas explained, leaning his knuckles on the desk. He took a massive hit in the cryptocurrency crash last year, tried to cover it up by skimming from the construction unions. But that's not what caught him. DEA agent Thomas Croft caught him. Croft dug up a buried racketeering charge from 2018, a sloppy hit Gideon orchestrated near the Drake Hotel. Croft used it to squeeze him. Roman stared at the numbers. The betrayal was a bitter, metallic taste in the back of his throat. So Gideon feeds Croft information to stay out of federal prison. And Caleb Weston? Weston is Croft's attack dog, Silas nodded. Croft knew we had Sienna. He knew Ricky Gallagher's debt was the tie. Croft wanted the encrypted ledgers for Castillo Logistics to build his RICO case. He couldn't get a warrant for the penthouse, so he had Weston go after the weakest link. Gideon provided Weston with Sienna's schedule, the hospital security shifts, and the blind spots in the parking garage. They were trying to break her down, to terrify her into stealing your ledger codes. Roman closed the folder. The quiet thwack of the cardboard echoing in the large room sounded like a gavel dropping. Gideon sold my security and my collateral to a federal rat to save his own skin, Roman stated. He stood up, smoothing his tie, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. Where is he? At his townhome in Lincoln Park. He thinks he's attending the sit-down at noon. He's not, Roman said. Take Artie. Go to Lincoln Park. Bring Gideon to the soundproof room at the Navy Pier warehouse. Do not let him make a phone call. Silas nodded, recognizing the death sentence in Roman's eyes. And Weston? Weston is mine, Roman said. As Silas left to execute the order, Roman walked out of his office and down the long glass corridor toward the master suite. He opened the door quietly. The room was bathed in soft morning light. Sienna was awake. She was sitting up against the headboard, the heavy comforter pulled up to her chest, her knees pulled tight. The painkillers Dr. Aris had administered were wearing off. Roman could see the tight lines of pain etched around her mouth. She flinched slightly as he approached the bed. The instinctual fear gutted him. You're awake, Roman said, keeping his voice low, pulling a chair to the side of the bed so he wouldn't tower over her. I'm sorry, she whispered immediately, her hazel eyes darting to his face. Roman, I didn't steal anything. He wanted your passwords, the codes to your safe. He told me if I didn't get them, he'd kill me, and then he'd have the DEA raid this place. I never gave him anything. Roman reached out, his large hand gently wrapping around her delicate wrist, pulling it away from where she was anxiously gripping the blankets. I know you didn't, Roman said softly. I know everything. I know how he got to you. I know who helped him. Sienna swallowed hard, wincing as her bruised ribs protested the movement. What happens now? Are you going to hand me over to the Russos, or throw me out? Roman's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Throw you out? I brought the feds to your doorstep, Roman, she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm a liability. I know how you operate. You don't keep liabilities. Roman leaned forward. He lifted his other hand, his thumb gently catching the tear on her cheek, careful to avoid the cut above her brow. You misunderstand your position in this house, Sienna, Roman murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a burning absolute intensity. You are not a liability. A liability is something I can discard. You are. He paused, the words foreign on his tongue, but undeniably true. You are mine. You are under my protection. And the men who made you think otherwise are about to find out exactly what happens when you touch something that belongs to Roman Castillo. Sienna stared at him, her breath hitching. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who terrified the entire city of Chicago, was looking at her with a fierce, possessive reverence. Rest, Roman ordered gently, standing up. Do not leave this room. Bruno is outside the door. I have a rat to exterminate and a trap to set. At 10:30 a.m., the atmosphere inside Lou Mitchell's diner on Jackson Boulevard was loud, filled with the clatter of silverware and the smell of strong coffee and fried eggs. Sitting in a back booth, nursing a black coffee, was Caleb Weston. He wore a leather jacket, his eyes darting nervously toward the entrance. Across from him sat DEA agent Thomas Croft. Croft was a man who looked exactly like what he was, a stressed, overworked federal agent in a cheap suit who was desperate for a career-making bust. She didn't show up for her shift at Northwestern, Caleb said, leaning across the table, his voice a frantic whisper. I waited in the garage for 2 hours. Nothing. Castillo's goon Bruno didn't even drop off the car. Croft frowned, taking a bite of his toast. Did you push her too hard, Caleb? I told you to scare her. Not put her in the ICU. If Castillo finds out you've been putting hands on his property, my badge won't stop him from putting a bullet in your skull. I had to motivate her. Caleb hissed defensively, though a flicker of genuine fear crossed his eyes. She's stubborn, but she was cracking, Croft. I felt it. Yesterday, she was begging. She was going to get the ledger codes. Well, now she's off the board, Croft muttered, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. Which means Castillo is either moving her or he knows something is wrong. We need to accelerate the timeline. How? Gideon Shaw, Croft said, a smug smile playing on his lips. I squeezed our inside man this morning. He gave me a timeline. Castillo is moving a massive shipment of untraceable ghost guns through the port of Chicago tonight at midnight, Pier 41. It's the smoking gun we need. If we catch Castillo's crew receiving illegal firearms, we can leverage it into a full RICO indictment. I have a tactical team on standby. Caleb looked relieved. And me? What do I do? You stay out of sight, Croft ordered. Go to the safe house in Pilsen. Do not contact the Russos. Do not go near the hospital. When the dust settles tomorrow morning, Castillo will be in federal custody, and you'll get your immunity deal. Caleb nodded, tossing a $5 bill on the table and slipping out the back door of the diner. What neither Caleb nor Agent Croft knew was that 2 booths down, a man in a gray hoodie reading the Chicago Tribune had recorded the entire conversation on a directional microphone disguised as a Bluetooth earpiece. An hour later, the audio file was playing from a laptop in the desolate, echoing expanse of the Navy Pier warehouse. Roman stood by a rusted shipping container, his hands in his pockets, listening to Croft's recorded voice echo through the damp air. Silas stood beside him, his expression grim. In the center of the room, tied to a heavy wooden chair under a single blinding halogen bulb, was Gideon Shaw. Gideon's face was bruised, his lips split. Artie Russo stood behind him, casually cleaning his fingernails with a tactical knife. A shipment of ghost guns at Pier 41, Roman repeated softly, the audio file ending with a click. He walked slowly toward Gideon. The older man flinched, pulling uselessly at the zip ties binding his wrists. Roman, please. Gideon begged, his voice cracking. Croft had me dead to rights. He was going to send me to Marion. He threatened my family. I had to give him something. So you gave him my shipping routes, Roman said, his voice terrifyingly calm. And you gave Caleb Weston the hospital security schedule. You gave a federal rat the green light to beat a woman under my protection. She was just collateral, Gideon cried out, misunderstanding Roman's anger entirely. She's Ricky Gallagher's sister. I didn't think you'd care if she got roughed up, as long as the business was safe. Roman stopped a foot away from Gideon. The absolute silence in the warehouse was suffocating. Silas and Artie didn't move a muscle. They knew what was coming. You never understood my business, Gideon, Roman said softly. You thought it was about the money. It's about respect. It's about the absolute certainty that what is mine remains untouched. Roman pulled the Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster in one fluid, lightning-fast motion. He didn't aim. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Gideon's chair tipped backward, crashing onto the concrete floor. Roman calmly holstered the weapon, his expression entirely unchanged, as if he had merely swatted a fly. Clean it up, Roman told Artie, not even looking at the body. He turned to Silas. Croft thinks he has a bust tonight at Pier 41 because we fed Gideon that fake intel. The DEA tactical team will be swarming an empty pier, looking for guns that don't exist. Croft will be humiliated, and his superiors will demand answers for the wasted resources. And Weston? Silas asked. A dark, lethal smile finally touched the corners of Roman's mouth. Croft told Weston to go to the safe house in Pilsen. He isolated him for us. He took him off the board, away from the feds and away from the Russos. Roman checked his heavy Rolex. It was 1:00 p.m. Gather the strike team, Roman ordered, the temperature in the room dropping as the Mafia boss fully embraced the violence of his nature. We're going to Pilsen, and I want Caleb Weston taken alive. The neighborhood of Pilsen, with its vibrant murals and narrow, brick-lined streets off 18th Street, was usually bustling. But by 4:00 p.m., a heavy, freezing rain had begun to fall, driving people indoors and turning the pavement slick and dark. It was the perfect cover. Caleb Weston's DEA-issued safe house was a nondescript, 2-story brownstone sandwiched between a closed bakery and a heavily barred pawn shop. It was supposed to be a ghost location, off the books. But in Chicago, money bought everything, including the blueprints to federal safe houses. 4 black armored Chevrolet Suburbans rolled to a silent stop in the back alley. Roman Castillo sat in the lead vehicle, his eyes fixed on the reinforced steel back door of the brownstone. He had traded his tailored suit for a black tactical sweater and Kevlar vest. His face was a mask of cold, concentrated violence. Beside him, Silas checked the magazine of his customized M4 carbine. Thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures inside on the second floor, Silas murmured, looking at a handheld monitor. Croft said Weston would be alone. He's got company. Roman's jaw tightened. I don't care if he has the Pope in there. No one leaves that building. At Roman's signal, a 4-man entry team moved silently through the freezing rain. Artie stepped up to the steel door with a specialized hydraulic breaching ram. With a dull, heavy crunch that was swallowed by the sound of the storm, the lock gave way. The Castillo men flooded the ground floor like smoke. They were professionals, no shouting, no unnecessary movements. Roman walked in behind them, his Sig Sauer drawn, his footsteps entirely silent on the dusty floorboards. Upstairs, Caleb Weston was panicking. He wasn't waiting for the DEA's raid on Pier 41 to finish. He was packing a black canvas go bag with stacks of cash and burner phones. Standing across from him in the dimly lit living room was Leo, a heavily tattooed lieutenant for the rival Russo family. You promised Victor Russo the Castillo ledgers by tonight, Weston, Leo growled, leaning against the peeling wallpaper. You don't get to rabbit to Miami just because your Fed handler is getting jumpy. Victor wants Roman Castillo bled dry. The feds are hitting Pier 41 at midnight. Castillo is going down anyway. Caleb shot back, zipping the bag aggressively. I gave Croft the tip. Once Castillo is in federal custody, his whole network collapses. You guys can pick up the pieces. Just give me my cut and let me. The subtle poft of a suppressed gunshot cut Caleb off. Leo's eyes widened in shock as a red flower bloomed on his chest. He collapsed backward, dead before he hit the ground. Caleb shrieked, dropping the duffel bag and scrambling for the Glock 19 on the coffee table. He didn't make it. The door to the living room was kicked open so hard it splintered off its hinges. 2 of Roman's men poured in, sweeping the room. Before Caleb could even raise his hands, Artie slammed the butt of his rifle into the back of Caleb's knees, sending him crashing to the floor. A heavy combat boot planted itself firmly on the back of his neck, pinning his face to the grimy rug. Clear, Silas announced, stepping into the room. The heavy methodical sound of footsteps echoed from the stairs. Caleb gasped for air, his cheek pressed against the floor, watching in absolute horror as Roman Castillo walked into the room. Roman looked at the dead Russo lieutenant, then down at Caleb. The air in the room seemed to turn to ice. "Hello, Caleb," Roman said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "Castillo!" Caleb choked out, panic making his voice pitch high. "You're dead. Croft is raiding your ghost guns right now. You're going to federal prison." Roman crouched down slowly, resting his forearms on his knees, bringing his face inches from Caleb's. "Pier 41 is empty, Caleb. Your inside man, Gideon, is currently at the bottom of the Chicago River, and Agent Croft is about to find out he's been chasing ghosts." Caleb's eyes widened in sheer terror. The realization that he had been entirely outplayed hit him like a freight train. He was alone. The DEA wasn't coming. The Russos couldn't help him. "Please," Caleb whimpered, his tough guy facade instantly crumbling. "I'm a federal informant. If you kill me, the entire alphabet soup of agencies will come down on your head. You can't." "I don't want to kill an informant," Roman said softly, tilting his head. "I want to kill the man who put his hands on Sienna." At the sound of her name, Caleb swallowed hard. He tried one last desperate gambit. "I have files, pictures, recordings. If I don't check in with Croft by morning, a dead man's switch sends everything to the FBI. I can ruin her, Castillo. I can ruin you both." Roman didn't blink. He simply reached out and gripped a handful of Caleb's hair, yanking his head up. "Artie," Roman said, his voice dead flat. "Break his hands, both of them. Slowly. Let's see how well he types on his dead man's switch when his fingers are dust." Caleb's screams echoed through the walls of the safe house, but in the desolate, rain-soaked streets of Pilsen, nobody heard a thing. Roman stood up, turning his back on the horrific scene, his eyes dark and empty. The shattered piece inside him wasn't satisfied yet. It wouldn't be until he knew Sienna was truly safe. By 9:00 p.m., Roman was back in the 88th floor penthouse. He had stripped off the tactical gear, showered in the guest wing to wash the smell of gunpowder and blood off his skin, and changed into a pair of soft gray sweatpants and a dark t-shirt. He felt a profound, heavy exhaustion settling into his bones, but his mind was sharp. Caleb Weston was currently locked in a soundproof holding cell at a Castillo-owned meatpacking plant in Fulton Market, his hands shattered, his spirit broken. Roman had the passwords, the burner phones, and the encrypted drives. There was no dead man's switch. It had been a pathetic bluff. The threat against Castillo Logistics and, more importantly, against Sienna, was neutralized. Roman walked toward the master suite. He paused at the door, taking a slow, deep breath. For a man who controlled a criminal empire, opening this door felt like the most terrifying thing he had done all day. He pushed it open. Sienna was awake, sitting in an oversized velvet armchair by the window, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. She was wearing one of his expensive, oversized button-down shirts, which swallowed her small frame. When she heard the door click, she turned. The bruised, battered state of her face still made Roman's chest ache violently. "You're back," she said softly. There was apprehension in her voice, but the paralyzing terror from the night before was gone. "It's done," Roman said, walking slowly into the room. He didn't approach her directly, not wanting to crowd her. He stood near the edge of the bed. "Weston will never come near you again. The files he had are destroyed. Agent Croft is currently facing a humiliating internal review for a botched raid." Sienna stared at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. She knew who Roman was. She knew what done meant in his world. Is he dead?" "No," Roman answered honestly, "but he wishes he was. He is no longer a threat to you, or to me." Sienna let out a long, say an aphist, shuddering breath, her shoulders dropping as the crushing weight of the past 3 weeks finally lifted off her. She looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to thank you. I know I'm here because of Ricky's debt. I shouldn't have brought my mess into your life." Roman crossed the room in 3 long strides. He knelt on the plush carpet in front of her armchair, forcing her to look down at him. The vulnerability in his posture was something no one in his organization had ever seen. "Stop talking about the debt," Roman said, his voice a fierce, low rumble. "Ricky Gallagher is a ghost. The money is irrelevant. You are not a transaction, Sienna." "Then what am I?" she whispered, a tear slipping down her bruised cheek. "Because for 3 months, you didn't even look at me." "Because I knew if I looked closely, I would see exactly what I'm seeing right now," Roman admitted, his voice rough with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. "I built my life on control, Sienna, on feeling nothing. But last night, when I saw what he did to you..." He reached up, his large, calloused hand gently cupping her uninjured cheek. "Everything I am, everything I built, ceased to matter. The only thing that mattered was making sure nobody ever hurt you again." Sienna leaned into his touch, a soft sob escaping her lips. The cold, ruthless Mafia boss was kneeling before her, offering a protection so absolute it was terrifying. "I was so scared, Roman," she cried softly. "I know," he murmured, his thumb brushing away her tears. "But you're not alone anymore. You stay with me, not as collateral, not as a prisoner, as mine. Do you understand?" Sienna looked into his dark, intense eyes and nodded slowly. The dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. The ice had melted, leaving behind a burning protective fire. Meanwhile, miles away in a sterile, fluorescent-lit federal office building, DEA agent Thomas Croft threw his coffee mug against the wall, watching it shatter into 100 pieces. His phone was ringing. It was a secure line. "Your raid was a disaster, Croft," a smooth, chilling voice said on the other end. It was Victor Russo, the head of the South Side Syndicate. "And my lieutenant Leo was found dead in a Pilsen safe house. Castillo made a fool of you, and he killed my man." Croft gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. "Castillo knew we were coming. He has a leak inside my operation. He took Weston." "Then we have a mutual problem," Victor Russo said coldly. "Castillo has grown too arrogant. He thinks he can operate without consequences. It's time to remind him that Chicago belongs to the Russos." "I want a meeting, Agent Croft." It's time the federal government and the South Side work together to tear Roman Castillo's empire straight down to the studs. The smoke inside the Cosa Nostra cigar lounge in the South Loop hung thick and heavy, smelling of imported tobacco and aged rum. Victor Russo, a man with silver hair and a face carved from granite, sat in a high-backed leather chair. Across from him, looking entirely out of place and sweating profusely, was DEA agent Thomas Croft. "You brought the federal government to my doorstep, Croft," Victor rumbled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler, "and because of your incompetence, Roman Castillo killed my best lieutenant." Castillo had a leak, Croft snapped defensively, tugging at his collar. "He outmaneuvered us. But he's exposed now. The DOJ is breathing down my neck because of the botched raid at Pier 41. If I don't deliver Castillo's head on a platter by the end of the week, I'm losing my badge, and you're losing your protection." Victor took a slow sip of his rum, his dark eyes glittering with malice. Castillo has always been a fortress. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have kids. He has no vices we can exploit. Or so I thought. Victor snapped his fingers. 2 massive enforcers dragged a bruised, bloodied, and weeping man out of the back room and threw him onto the Persian rug between Victor and Croft. It was Ricky Gallagher, Sienna's stepbrother. "We found this piece of trash hiding in a roach-infested motel in Gary, Indiana," Victor sneered. Looking down at Ricky with profound disgust, he owed Silas Vanderberg $600,000, but instead of killing him, Castillo took his sister as collateral. Croft frowned. "A civilian nurse. Caleb Weston mentioned her. So what? Castillo uses people to settle debts all the time. She's nobody." "That's where you're wrong, Agent Croft," Victor said, leaning forward. "My men have been watching the penthouse. Since yesterday, Castillo's security around the girl has quadrupled. He put his personal underboss, Silas, in charge of her detail. Roman Castillo doesn't burn federal safe houses and execute lieutenants over a piece of collateral. He's protecting her. She is the crack in the armor." Ricky sobbed into the carpet. "Please, Mr. Russo, I'll get you the money. Just let me go." "Shut up, Ricky," Victor spat. He looked back at Croft. "We have the bait. Now we set the trap. We force Castillo to step out of his high-rise fortress out into the open, where your rogue tactical squad and my shooters can finally put him in the ground." High above the city, in the serene, soundproofed walls of the penthouse, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. It had been 48 hours since Roman had found Sienna in the bathroom. The violent bruises on her ribs were beginning to fade into a dull, yellowish purple, though she still moved with a stiff caution. Dr. Eris had visited twice more, leaving a fresh supply of bandages and an arnica salve. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the space between Roman and Sienna. They were currently in the penthouse's massive, state-of-the-art kitchen. Roman, dressed in a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, was surprisingly adept at the stove. He was making espresso, the rich, bitter aroma filling the room. Sienna sat on one of the velvet bar stools, watching him. She wore one of his thick cashmere sweaters, feeling a strange, profound sense of safety that she hadn't experienced in years. "You don't have to cook for me, Roman," she said softly, though a small smile touched her lips. "I know you have a private chef." "Henri talks too much," Roman replied without looking back, expertly frothing the milk. "And right now, I prefer the quiet." He walked over and set the porcelain cup in front of her. His hand lingered on the marble counter, just inches from hers. "How are the ribs?" "Better," she promised, looking up into his dark eyes. The terrifying, cold mob boss the city feared was nowhere to be found in this room. With her, Roman was intensely focused, fiercely gentle, and dangerously attentive. "Good," Roman murmured. He reached into his pocket and placed something heavy and cold on the counter beside her espresso. Sienna blinked. It was a sleek, matte black Kimber Micro 9mm handgun. "Roman," she breathed, instinctively pulling her hands back. "I have disabled the threat against you," Roman said, his voice taking on that calm, authoritative edge she had come to know. "But my world is volatile, Sienna. I will have a detail on you at all times, but I need to know that if the absolute worst happens, you are not defenseless." He picked up the weapon, effortlessly popping the magazine out and locking the slide back to show her it was empty. He held it out to her, grip first. Tomorrow, Silas will take you to the underground range at the warehouse. He will teach you how to strip it, clean it, and fire it until it becomes muscle memory. You are never going to be a victim again. Understood? Sienna looked at the gun, then at the man offering it. He wasn't giving her a weapon to mold her into a criminal. He was giving her power, the power Caleb had stripped from her. She reached out, her smaller hand wrapping around the grip. Understood, she said, her voice steady. Before Roman could reply, his encrypted cell phone vibrated violently against the marble counter. It was an unknown number. Roman's eyes hardened. He picked it up and hit the speaker button. Speak. Hello, Roman. Roman didn't flinch, but the temperature in the kitchen plummeted. Sienna felt a shiver run down her spine. It was Victor Russo. Victor. You're calling a line you shouldn't have, Roman said smoothly. To what do I owe the displeasure? I have something that belongs to you, Victor said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Or rather, something that belongs to the pretty little nurse sitting in your penthouse. Say hello, Ricky. A pathetic, garbled cry echoed through the speaker. Sienna! Sienna, please help me. They're going to kill me. Sienna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Despite everything Ricky had done, despite the hell he had dropped her into, he was still her brother. Roman's hand immediately shot out, gripping Sienna's shoulder in a firm, grounding hold. His thumb brushed against her collarbone, a silent promise. Ricky Gallagher is a deadbeat who owes me money, Roman said, his voice a flat, deadened drawl. You want to kill him, Victor? Be my guest. Saves me the bullet. Don't play games, Roman, Victor chuckled darkly. I know the girl is your weak spot. Croft told me everything, so here is the deal. Midnight tonight. The decommissioned Fisk generating station in Pilsen. You come alone. You sign over the deed to the South Loop ports and the logistics ledgers to me, and you give Croft your confession to the Pier 41 ghost gun smuggling. If you don't, I put a bullet in Ricky's head, and Croft sends a federal SWAT team to raid your penthouse and arrest the girl as an accomplice to Caleb Weston's torture. The line went dead. Sienna was trembling, her hazel eyes wide with terror. Roman, they're going to kill him. And the feds. Roman slowly put the phone down. The sheer, unadulterated violence radiating from him was palpable, but his touch on her shoulder remained perfectly gentle. They aren't going to do anything, Roman said, his voice a lethal, vibrating promise. He looked down at her, his eyes entirely black. Victor Russo made a fatal miscalculation. He thinks I'm going to negotiate. Roman pulled his hand away and pressed a button on his earpiece. Silas, Artie, arm the crew, we are going to war. The Fisk generating station was a colossal, rotting monument to Chicago's industrial past. The massive brick smokestacks loomed against the stormy night sky, rain pouring through the shattered skylights and pooling on the cracked concrete floors of the main turbine hall. It was 11:55 p.m. Victor Russo stood in the center of the cavernous room, flanked by 10 heavily armed enforcers. A few yards away, Agent Thomas Croft stood nervously with 4 rogue DEA tactical agents, their faces covered by balaclavas. Tied to a rusted metal pillar, gagged and sobbing uncontrollably, was Ricky Gallagher. He's not coming, Croft muttered, constantly checking his watch. Castillo isn't stupid. He knows it's a kill box. He'll come, Victor said confidently, a smug smile on his face. Pride and a pretty girl. It makes even the smartest men stupid. Right on cue, the heavy steel doors at the far end of the turbine hall groaned open. The wind howled through the gap, bringing with it the freezing rain. Footsteps echoed in the massive space. Slow. Deliberate. Roman Castillo walked into the light of the halogen work lamps Russo's men had set up. He wasn't wearing tactical gear this time. He was wearing a bespoke 3-piece midnight blue suit, looking every inch the untouchable king of the city. He walked completely alone, his hands casually in his pockets, his face an impenetrable mask. "Roman!" Victor called out, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "I have to admit, I didn't think you had the stomach to walk into your own grave." Roman stopped 30 yards away. He glanced at the terrified Ricky, then at Croft, and finally locked eyes with Victor. "You brought federal agents to a Mafia sit-down, Victor," Roman said, his voice easily carrying over the sound of the rain. "Your father would be ashamed of what a coward you've become." Victor's face flushed with anger. "Drop the bravado, Castillo. Where are the ledgers? Where is the deed to the ports?" I didn't bring them, Roman stated simply. Croft stepped forward, pulling his weapon. Then you're under arrest, Castillo, hands on your head. My men are going to take you in, and we're sending a team to your penthouse right now for the girl. A dark, chilling smile slowly spread across Roman's face. It was the smile of a predator watching a rat walk into a steel trap. You aren't sending anyone anywhere, Agent Croft, Roman said softly. He pulled a small, silver flash drive from his vest pocket and held it up. 3 hours ago, I had my underboss personally deliver copies of the Caleb Weston interrogation videos, your offshore banking records, and your communication logs with Gideon Shaw directly to the director of the FBI and the United States Attorney General. Croft froze, the blood draining from his face. You're lying. Listen closely, Roman said. Through the massive broken windows, the distant rising wail of dozens of sirens began to cut through the storm. It wasn't local police. It was the heavy, coordinated siren blasts of federal armored vehicles moving in. The DOJ isn't coming to arrest me, Croft, Roman said, his voice cold and victorious. They're coming to arrest you for corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your career is over. You'll die in a federal penitentiary. Croft panicked. He looked at his rogue tactical agents, but they were already backing away, realizing they had been utterly compromised. Kill him, Victor roared, raising his own weapon. Kill him now. But Roman had never come alone. Before Victor's men could even raise their rifles, the high-pitched crack of a sniper rifle echoed from the upper catwalks. The halogen work lamp next to Victor shattered, plunging half the room into darkness. Artie! Now, Roman shouted, dropping to the floor behind a massive rusted turbine generator as gunfire erupted. Silas Vanderberg had been positioned on the catwalks for an hour. His sniper fire was devastatingly precise, picking off Russo's enforcers before they could find cover. From the shadows of the loading dock, Artie and a dozen of Roman's elite shooters poured into the room, flanking Victor's men in a perfectly executed tactical pincer movement. The turbine hall turned into a chaotic, deafening war zone. Flashes of muzzle fire illuminated the dark brick. Roman drew his Sig Sauer, moving with lethal, terrifying efficiency. He didn't hide. He advanced. Agent Croft tried to run toward the back exit, slipping on the wet concrete. Roman didn't even break his stride. He fired 2 shots. Croft screamed, going down with shattered kneecaps, left to bleed on the floor until the FBI arrived to collect him. Victor Russo, realizing his men were being slaughtered and the trap had completely reversed, scrambled behind the metal pillar where Ricky was tied. Victor grabbed Ricky by the hair, putting a gun to his head, using the terrified man as a human shield. Call them off, Roman. Victor screamed, his eyes wild with desperation as Roman stalked toward him, stepping over the bodies of fallen enforcers. Call them off or the brother dies. Roman stopped 10 feet away. The gunfire around the hall was dying down as Silas and Artie secured the perimeter. The FBI sirens were getting deafeningly close. Roman looked at Ricky. The man who had sold his sister into a nightmare to cover a gambling debt. The man who was the catalyst for all of this. Do you think I care if he dies? Roman asked, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the hall. The absolute freezing apathy in his tone made Victor hesitate. He is nothing to me. But you, Victor. You touched what is mine. In that split second of Victor's hesitation, Roman raised his weapon and fired a single perfect shot. The bullet grazed Ricky's ear and embedded itself squarely in the center of Victor Russo's forehead. Victor collapsed backward, dead before he hit the ground. Ricky shrieked, covered in his captor's blood, struggling against his zip ties. Roman walked over to Ricky. He pulled a tactical knife from his pocket and cut the ties binding the man's hands. Ricky fell to his knees, sobbing hysterically. Thank you. Oh God, Roman, thank you. Shut your mouth, Roman sneered, grabbing Ricky by the collar and hauling him to his feet. He slammed Ricky against the pillar. You are going to walk out the back door. You are going to leave Chicago. If I ever see your face in this city again, if you ever try to contact Sienna again, I won't use a gun. I will let Silas take you apart with his bare hands. Do you understand? Ricky nodded frantically, his face pale. Roman shoved him away, and Ricky bolted into the dark, rainy night, vanishing forever. Boss, Silas called out, jogging over. Feds are breaching the outer gates. It's time to ghost. Roman holstered his weapon, adjusting the cuffs of his suit as if he hadn't just orchestrated a massacre. Let's go home. The neon lights of Chicago still bled through the rain-streaked glass of the 88th floor penthouse, but the silence inside was no longer deafening. It was peaceful. Roman Castillo had torn down his entire empire's rules, ignited a brutal war with a rival family, and dismantled a corrupt federal operation, all for a woman who was supposed to be nothing but a debt. Sienna Hayes had entered his world as a terrified captive, bearing the violent marks of a life she couldn't escape. But the night Roman saw her bruises at 2 a.m, the ruthless, untouchable Mafia boss fundamentally changed. He didn't just protect her, he burned the world down to keep her safe. Now, she stood by his side, not as collateral, but as the undisputed queen of his empire. The ice in Roman's veins had shattered permanently, replaced by a fierce, unyielding devotion that Chicago's underworld would never forget.